Welcome back. We're going to talk through everything you need to know about the Ghost of Christmas Present. I'm going to talk through what to learn, what it means, and what to say about it. Let's jump straight into the ghost itself. I'm going to whiz through 4 quotations that tell you everything you need to know about the ghost. Each of them can be put on a flashcard if you haven't done already, and each of them can be exploded as part of practice. Right, number 1 is about its appearance, and Dickens is careful to give you a lot of detail about it. He describes how the ghost's capacious breast was bare. Let's pick this apart and give you something to say. Dickens uses the word bare for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it represents honesty and truth, just like the clear jet of light in the previous ghost. This ghost is here to show the truth of Christmas, as it is right now for people throughout the land. This works because the word bare means not covered, not disguised or dressed up. You can also take it as meaning the way things should be, unadulterated and unchanged. This great ghost of a man is open. He's got nothing to hide, in his heart at least, and that also makes him a bit vulnerable. This elicits a feeling of trust. The reader warms to him, and this is doubled down by that capacious breast of his. This gives us the idea that he's capable of love in a big way. He's generous in spirit. This is exactly what Scrooge needs to be, so he's going to learn a lot here. Quotation number 2 is about the symbolism of what it's wearing. He has an antique scabbard, but no sword in it. Okay, so a scabbard is the sleeve that a sword goes in. The pointed detail of an absent sword signifies that the ghost is peaceful, which in turn could remind us that Christmas is a time of peace and goodwill. The ghost's purpose is to promote harmony, abundance, and joy, rather than enforce or impose through power or aggression. This peaceful nature is at odds with Scrooge in the first part of the story, and you could explore that by thinking about how he is described in the early part of the novella, such as being a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. Check out my playlist if you want the lowdown on that one. If you're wondering why the Ghost of Christmas Present has an object that is described using the word antique, you might be onto something. The antique nature of the scabbard suggests peace and goodwill are timeless virtues, values that transcend generations, no matter when you're born. And this ghost is born and dies in a single day. Yet kindness and generosity and communal warmth are part of a long-standing tradition of peace that forms part of his nature. That idea of warmth comes back in what he's carrying in his hands. As number 3 is he bore a glowing torch in shape not unlike Plenty's horn. Plenty's horn is another name for the Cornucopia. This is a mythological object, a kind of never-ending supply of food. It's usually a symbol of abundance and prosperity and crops up absolutely everywhere if you look in old architecture or ancient statues. The picture I've chosen here is by Rubens and shows the Roman goddess Abundantia with a horn of plenty. And I chose this one because she's holding it just like a waiter in a restaurant with an oversized pepper mill, which is kind of how the ghost uses it to sprinkle warmth and goodwill on others, such as when he blesses gatherings and brings cheer to even the poorest families. The abundance he shows and shares is an abundance of real value, shared happiness and kindness. Quotation 4 is what the ghost says to Scrooge when he first sees him. He bellows, "Come in, know me better, man." These imperatives, come in, know me better, are telling Scrooge what to do, what he needs to learn, and how he will secure his redemption. Look at the end of the sentence, for the word man is used. It's not a hippie saying, "Hey man." This ghost is telling Scrooge that he is a man, a human, and is part of society. You could compare this with Fred's assertion to Scrooge earlier that they are all fellow passengers to the grave. Scrooge and the ghost are now together. Scrooge is being welcomed, and this ghost represents that openness that Scrooge lacks. Finally, it's not the ghost that Scrooge needs to know, it's what he symbolises, the here and now, the happiness, the openness of Christmas. So the next section is about what the ghost reveals. Remember, this is a whole chapter, a whole stave, and you can't learn everything. If you go through the chapter independently, you might want to add a couple of extra quotations, but don't go overboard. You don't want to be overwhelmed. I have added a couple of ideas to the video description down below, so you can use that as a starting point if you want to go deeper. But I've limited myself to 4 in this video. As DJs used to say, all killer, no filler. Let's start by looking at the Cratchit family. They are the emotional heartbeat of the novella. We see them because Dickens wants to emphasise the gulf between Scrooge's wealth and unhappiness with poverty and the positive human qualities that are present even within poverty. Despite their lack of resources, the Cratchits are joyful, grateful, and united as a family. They make the most of their modest Christmas meal, and Bob Cratchit, Scrooge's underpaid clerk, toasts to Scrooge's health by raising his glass and saying, "Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast." Now, this is not a universally shared sentiment in the Cratchit family, and I would agree with you if you argued that Dickens presents people experiencing poverty as pitifully acquiescent to their own suffering. Bob Cratchit accepts his own position, but Dickens doesn't want to present a rebellious and revolutionary working class. He wants to present a working class that needs looking after, a group that is on your side as a capitalist or as a rich person, as long as you put a bit of effort in. So they will still salute you even when you're being an absolute like Scrooge. I feel I haven't given you enough to say about this quotation, so let's just say that the alliterative toast in Founder of the Feast emphasises Bob's gratefulness despite his cruel treatment. The truth of the character is also seen best in comparison to Scrooge, who is quite happy to see the death of what he termed earlier the surplus population. And that leads us to the second quotation in this section, which comes in response to Scrooge inquiring if Tiny Tim will live. The ghost replies, "I see a vacant seat." This is a great quotation to analyse because it says so much with so little. One of the techniques that's being used is euphemism. It would be too cruel to say, "Tiny Tim is going to die." It's too obvious and too crude, so he dresses it up. The truth is too ugly for this ghost of kindness and generosity. This is a clear example of the writer eliciting or pulling sympathy from the reader. We don't want this to foreshadow the death of an innocent child. Yes, Tiny Tim doesn't really contribute economically, but he's got a soul. I'm looking at you here, Reverend Thomas Malthus. A quotation often attributed to Mahatma Gandhi is, "The true measure of any society can be found in how it treats its most vulnerable members." Now, whether Gandhi actually said those words or not, they do come to the heart of the matter with Tiny Tim. Tim's innocence, optimism, and vulnerability make his potential death especially tragic, and it is this that tugs at Scrooge's conscience. The fact that he asked a question about Tiny Tim's survival shows he does care. The character's refusal to pay Bob Cratchit a fair wage and his broader disregard for the poor contribute to their very suffering, and it is this moment that crystallises Scrooge's understanding of his own moral responsibility. So, in many ways, at this point in the story, Scrooge is a better man. He's learned his lesson. He knows he has to look after Bob so Tiny Tim can live. He's adopted a kind of paternal capitalism, but the ghost carries on. At the end of the stave, he reveals the hidden children in his cloak, saying, "This boy is ignorance, this girl is want." These two are a gift for analysis, if not for a happy society. Let's start with them as a pair. They're hidden within the ghost's skirts because wealthy people don't tend to notice poverty for some reason. But those kids have always been there, and this is the Ghost of Christmas Present. So for Dickens, it's a problem right here, right now, that his readers aren't aware of. If you think about the symbolism of this ghost, the plentiful generosity of Christmas, it gets somewhat undercut if you consider these two children. But let's be honest, we, and I'm really talking about myself here, don't tend to think about poverty in the world when we're opening presents or tucking into the pigs in blankets on Christmas Day. So these two children become the personification of an abstraction. These ideas, ignorance and want, become a reality, and they are personified with proper noun status. They get capital letters. Now, this boy represents a lack of education, awareness, understanding in society. For Dickens and for most thinking people, ignorance in society is dangerous, and it leads to societal decay, perpetuates poverty, and fosters inequality and injustice. The ghost warns Scrooge, and by extension society, to beware of ignorance, especially as it often underpins and creates the environment for exploitation and greed to flourish. The girl, well, she symbolises extreme poverty and deprivation. She highlights the desperate needs of the poor, whose suffering is exacerbated by neglect by the wealthy and powerful. Dickens wants to draw attention to the dire living conditions of many people during the Industrial Revolution, and urging compassion and action by those capable of bringing it about. The final quotation is that which is written on the boy's forehead. Dickens writes, "On his brow I see that written, which is doom." Again, this is the personification of an abstract idea, and this is for all of mankind. Unchecked ignorance will lead to catastrophe, both for individuals and society as a whole. Dickens implies that without education or addressing poverty, society risks perpetuating suffering and injustice, which could result in revolution or societal collapse. To put it another way, if you treat people like animals, they will eventually bite back. I hope you found that useful and interesting, and if you did, please subscribe, consider watching one of these videos, and I look forward to seeing you back soon.